Thanks for watching The Black Collective. Today, I actually went to City Hall and got to sit down with Adolfo Briceno, a Human Relations Hispanic Outreach Administrator here in the City of Winston Salem, and talk about fair housing. Here's a little bit of the basics regarding fair housing and how it operates within the city limits of Winston Salem.
Well, as I was saying, I think one of the first things that I learned when I came to this world is that whatever we think is discriminatory or is discrimination, we need to not unlearn it, but probably what we believe is discriminatory or discrimination, maybe the courts will not consider it so. So in our world, we need to learn what the courts are doing and what the courts believe is discriminatory in order for us to do a much more efficient job. If you did not know this, we as investigators are supposed to find evidence that discrimination occurred. Not really. There's a standard that's called, but it's not like in the criminal cases where is beyond a reasonable doubt, right? That is the standard there. We don't have that standard. Is a lesser standard in a way, right? But it is like the accumulation of all the facts that we're able to uncover that can probably show in a third-party perspective that the act was discriminatory. Okay, so that is more or less the standard. There's a real name for it, and I forgot what the name. So anyway, but the whole point is that when we do investigate, we try to determine if discrimination occurred or not, right? And when we try to do that, we try to find what's relevant according to, what we know has been discriminatory in the past. And we many times use that guidance of what the courts have done. That is very important in what we. All the other courts, not only the Supreme Court, but we try to find cases or administrative decisions by HUD that will show us that a similar set of facts in the past have been deemed discriminatory. That is more or less the standard that we try to use. So sometimes between that effort and what people could consider a discriminatory action may be a gap, right? Maybe there is a gap in them, but it is okay. Because what I always tell people is it doesn't matter. If you believe that you or someone that you know has been discriminated, file a complaint. So as I was saying, when we do investigations, it is the preponderance of evidence that is going to lead us into determining that a discriminatory action occurred. Mm-hmm. The standard is different from other cases like criminal cases where it has to be a little bit more precise. But it's still a high bar, even though it's a lesser standard than the ones that they use in criminal cases, for instance. It's still a high bar because we still have to show in a third-party perspective, right, that this action was discriminatory or this accumulation of actions are discriminatory. That's the standard. And what I was trying to share is that it can be a gap between what people could consider discriminatory versus this methodic approach, let's say, to what we try to do and attempt to do here in this office when somebody files a fair housing complaint. As I have said many times, even though you don't know these standards, even though it doesn't matter, you can still file a complaint and we will investigate the complaint and we will determine if there is enough evidence in there to try to determine if the action or the actions that the person was victim of are discriminatory or not.
So it's good to even if it's not specifically discrimination based as far as the actions that's being taken, is good to come and report it because it may add to future investigations as far as if this act was repeated in a certain sense, and then you can use that as evidence of, this may have been a discriminatory act.
No, we couldn't use whatever happened before in a different case.
Mm-hmm.
We probably could not use it in this one specific.
Okay.
It could be a guidance, right?
Okay.
If a court has determined in the past that this similar set of facts were considered discriminatory, we could use that as a guidance, right? But it is the specific set of facts in this case that will determine that. Now, and when I say, anyway, file a complaint, is because it is your right, first, and maybe it is discriminatory. You really don't know that. Sometimes you can have an inkling into that. Sometimes perhaps you heard something, or you think you are hearing or seeing a pattern that seems to be applied differently to a protected category. Now remember, and this is part of the basics of fair housing, there are 7 protected categories. You are seeing them, all of them, in the document that I gave you. Race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, and disability. The 2 most common categories are that people file under are disability and race. Okay, those are the 3 most common in the nation, but even here in Winston-Salem too. Those are the most common. Now, it is important what I'm showing you because sometimes a discriminatory action may not be covered by the Fair Housing Act, correct? I think a good example could be something that has to do with veteran status. Somebody in the past here tried to file a complaint based on veteran status, but veteran status is not covered, correct?
Gotcha.
Let me give you an example that is really silly, but it could illustrate this. Let's assume that somebody is a fan of the Arizona Cardinals, however, correct, right? It doesn't matter what team.
Right.
We can say the Minnesota Vikings. And let's use that example. This guy is a Minnesota Viking fan, and the owner of the complex is a Green Bay Packers fan, and they can't stand him.
Right.
And he tells him, "I don't like Minnesota Viking fans. I can't have you as a tenant because I despise you. I really don't like you."
Right.
Okay? So the housing opportunity is denied based on that fact. He will not be covered. Okay? That's a silly example.
Wow.
But if it were to happen, probably that's the answer that will be given that individual. I'm sorry, sir. Sports fandom is not covered, is not protected.
Or fair housing.
Right. So you see, you lost a fair housing opportunity. You were denied one over a category that is not protected. Okay? So it can happen that you lose an opportunity in fair housing. Unfairly so, immorally wrong, but it's not covered. It's a silly example.
Yeah.
Correct?
But
it could happen. In here, we have denied people based on that, telling them, "I'm sorry, sir or ma'am, you don't have jurisdiction, or you don't have a standing to file a fair housing complaint." Remember also that the Act says that you have only 1 year to file a complaint. Okay? So you cannot come to this office and say, "This happened 5 years ago." Okay?
Yeah.
Because we will have to tell you, you don't have standing. You have only 1 year to file a complaint. Okay? So these are the kind of things that people don't know. But this is hopefully something that we can tell them. Okay? So do not wait either. I guess that's the corollary, right? Once that happens, do not wait too much or too long because you only have 1 year to file a complaint. Okay?
A lot of people don't know that.
Right. So now, what the protection includes, you're seeing that also, is the next slide. Is sale, rental, leasing, advertisement, brokerage services, availability. All of that is included, okay? Financial services too are included, which means to the bank. So most everything that's around the sale or renting of fair housing is covered. Now, another important thing that I always like to say to people is, what does the Fair Housing Act protect? I'm going to answer that for you. It protects the fair shot to access housing. Okay? The Fair Housing Act doesn't say that they have to give you housing, right? Correct?
Right.
Protects the access to housing. Okay? Everybody needs to have a fair shot, a fair opportunity to get to housing, either to rent it or to own it, right? And of course, it is what the Fair Housing Act protects is precisely that those decisions of who gets access to the housing or the services that are related to housing are never, that those decisions are never taken into consideration. I mean, that race, the protected classes, race, color, religion, sex, national origin, family status, and disability are never part of the decision of why somebody was either given housing, well, not given housing, particularly denied housing.
So that means.
Remember, the denial of housing or giving different terms and conditions, even when you are giving access to the housing, those are the two things that are protected. Okay? Denial is a red flag, especially if you believe it was based on one of these protected categories. Or they give you the house, they give you whatever you're looking for, the loan, right? But they gave you different terms and conditions, specifically based on one of these protected categories. Recently, there has been some also rulings when it comes to pregnancy and pregnant females, right? Some banks in the past have completely denied the loan, even though it had been pre-approved, right? When they found out that the female was pregnant, and they were concerned about their ability to pay the loan once she became pregnant, and that has been deemed discriminatory.
Wow.
Correct? Yeah. So sometimes these questions are not easy to answer, right? Because sometimes when the people that are in charge of this decision takes these decisions, they're really not thinking, I'm going to discriminate, right? They're not really thinking, this is what I'm going to do because I don't like that particular, right? But ends up having that effect. And that's also something that I also try to emphasize or underscore in my presentations, because sometimes the intention is really not there.
It might be,
but the act says that you don't have to have the intention. We don't have to prove that you wanted to discriminate. It just needs to have that effect, and it's part of the things that we say. If we go to the types of discrimination, I mean, if we go to disability, we have in disability, it is important that anybody understands that there are two types of disabilities, right? Generally, at least in the fair housing lens, physical disabilities, right, and mental disabilities. The physical disabilities sometimes are visible, right?
Right.
Not all the time, but sometimes are visible. And mental disabilities, same thing. For the most part, I would say the mental disabilities are not evident. You have to interact with the individual to perhaps know that he or she has a mental disability. But anyway, because of that, there are two types of requirements. One is to make modifications, like physical changes in the structure of a building, so that the person can enjoy that building as if he didn't have the disability. That's the idea behind the protection. And when you do that, you call it a reasonable modification. Okay? And then typically when it comes to mental disabilities, you talk about reasonable accommodations, which are typically changes in practices or in policies. A prime example of that would be animals. If a person needs an animal because of his or her disability, and the complex has a no pets policy, they can ask that the policy is waived for him or for her because of the disability. So he will be given his special treatment or preferential treatment because of the disability. And that's also interesting. It's the only category in where the preferential treatment is emphasized. The protection is there.
Okay.
All the other categories, they don't want preferential treatment. They just want to be treated like everybody else.
Right.
Okay? Except when it comes to disabilities. Okay? What is race discrimination? In general, race refers to physical features inherent to the individual that he or she cannot change. Okay? Can also mean stereotyping based on skin color, hair texture, or certain facial features. Okay? And color is also a protected category that typically includes skin complexion, right? The very dark or the very light.
Right.
Okay. Then familial status, typically familial status means children. But familial status is also a very interesting category because it can be very wide. Familial status can also mean no children, right? Or no marriage, correct?
Yeah.
So that is also protected. But typically, familial status means children. Sometimes there are unreasonable safeguards in some complexes to try to prevent either that children get hurt or that they will mess up something. And if they are overbearing, that could be discriminatory. Okay. If we keep on going, national origin discrimination. This is also a very interesting category because national origin in general means a geographic area in which a person was born or his ancestors came. Okay. So a national origin can also be used even if you are confused or you don't know exactly the origin of that individual. If you call this individual, for instance, Chinese, but he's not Chinese, or nothing in his ancestry is Chinese. He's Vietnamese or Japanese or another different nationality. Even that confusion could be considered discriminatory, and it will be under national origin discrimination. And of course, blanket statements regarding tenants must speak English would be discriminatory. Lack of English proficiency, right? And if you include that into the decision of providing a service or not giving a service or denying it, right? All that could be discriminatory. A very trivia question regarding this is when a Hispanic individual files a fair housing complaint because he is Hispanic, because he believes that he was being discriminated because he is Hispanic, we will file under national origin discrimination, regardless of where he was born, either in the United States or in our countries. Okay, religious discrimination. Typically, this has to do with displaying religious symbols in the house. That is protected. You can display them, and it will be covered under this category. In the past, it could also mean that certain restrictions that have to do with their celebrations. In the context of housing, they shouldn't have any bearing on that decision, right? Or on the service that you're providing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some senior exceptions, if you were not aware of them. There are buildings they can be occupied by age 62 or older. Sometimes 100% of the units, sometimes just 80% of the units. But they're designated as senior housing, right?
Okay, gotcha.
If you don't know that, and you go and apply there, and they tell you, no, you can't, because you're not over 62, all right? There are some steps that these buildings have to take with HUD to get this designation,
Right.
but once they get that designation, that's it. They have that exemption.
Mm-hmm.
Only people either 62 or older or 55 or older can live in that building, correct?
Gotcha.
And that could be, it will be discriminatory, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you try to apply, you don't have these conditions, but it is one of the exceptions. Other exemptions that in the act have to do with this is called the Miss Murphy exemption, where if you own less than 3 single family units, these all have to be in the same person.
Mm-hmm.
You own less than 3 single family units, you do not use a realtor, you do not use discriminatory ads for it, and you have only made, you live in one of those units, and you have only made one sale or less in a 24-month period, you could be exempted from the Fair Housing Act. Okay?
Wow.
Which means that you could potentially use these categories
to
determine who moves in and who. Typically, the Ms. Murphy exception has to do with the preference of some landlords that live in their houses in renting the rooms, that they only want females.
Right.
Sometimes they only want white females, right? But if they cover these conditions, they may be exempted under the Fair Housing.
And be able to still do it.
Okay, but this is an exemption that is built in the Fair Housing Act.
Right. It kind of gives balance, I guess you could say.
Yeah. In 2022, which is when we did this, there were some new guidances. You're seeing at them here. LGBTQIA. This is a very recent guideline. In 2021, the Biden administration determined that gender identity and sexual orientation are the same as sex. So this means that now no landlord can tell people, I don't like gays,
Right.
or I don't like lesbians, and I'm not gonna rent that, or transgender, or any other category under that rainbow, right? I don't like them, and I'm not gonna rent. Now, after that guidance, that is direct evidence that a discrimination occurred. Okay, they cannot do it. Correct. Disparate impact rules. This is a much older thing, but disparate impact in general means that if a landlord is applying the policies of the complex equally across the board every time, even if he does that, but one category of the protected categories is suffering this policy overwhelmingly, it could be considered discriminatory. And that's the disparate impact. So you see, so even if, and that's why the disparate impact comes, even if you're applying the policy evenly, but if one of these groups is overwhelmingly suffering the what do you call it, the conditions, right, established, or the consequences established by the guideline, that could be discriminatory. We don't know what it could be, but that is more or less the idea behind it. Okay, it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court determined back in 2013, 14, that the HUD could use that standard, and it was okay. Criminal background checks, that's also a new thing. It's a similar thing. The idea behind this is that the guidance came out in 2014, and the idea behind the criminal background checks is that if something happened in the criminal past of the applicant, and it happened a long time ago,
Right.
they want to give them a chance of accessing housing, right? So the guidance says that landlords cannot use blanket policies regarding that. They cannot just say, if I find one criminal thing in your past, that's it, you're done, you're denied.
Right.
Correct? So now landlords have to do a personalized, let's say, assessment on that individual. So the application can still be denied based on criminal background checks, but it has to be a personalized assessment on that particular applicant.
Gotcha.
If they say, no, I denied it because my rule says that anything criminal, I'm going to deny you, that could be discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Since 2016, smoke-free policies on HUD-funded buildings. Basically, with that, HUD said that we have smoke-free policies here. And HUD said, you cannot use the standard of a reasonable accommodation so you can smoke in the building. You have to go 25 feet out or in designated areas, right? And you cannot tell me that because you're sick, you need to smoke here in the building. That's more or less the standard that came with this. And then, of course, the companion animal guidance. Basically, that one is nowadays, HUD says that the physician that gives the doctor letter to support that the animal stays with you in the complex, the physician has to have a professional knowledge as an individual with a disability. You cannot just buy something from the internet, or even if the physician or the therapist or however, a medical provider, even if he or she is licensed, he has to have a personalized knowledge of your disability. You have to be his patient. That's pretty much what the guidance says regarding that. And that is pretty much.
Thank you again for watching, and thank you, Adolfo Briceno, for the information you divulged today in our discussion. This is The Black Collective. You guys have a great evening. Peace.